Today I have the pleasure to introduce Eva Marsh, one of the year 2004 inductees into McMaster's Alumni Gallery. Ms. Marsh graduated from McMaster with a Bachelor of Science degree in Physics in 1979 and a Master of Science degree in Electrical Engineering in 1981. Eva Marsh is a remarkable woman with an amazing story of survivor to tell. First of all, I'd like to ask you where you attended school or prior to coming to university.
I was raised in Waterdown and attended St. Thomas School in Waterdown, and then went on to do my high school at Notre Dame Convent, or Notre Dame Academy at that time.
You did not go to university directly, is that correct?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I did 1 year at the Ontario Veterinary College in Guelph, and that was before student loans, and so it was 1 year only. I married a veterinary student and had children and stayed to work at the veterinary college to help my ex-husband through college. And then when I was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis in 1967, marriage didn't last long after that, and so I became a single parent obviously people didn't think I had much of a prospect in life, but I was determined that I was going to raise my children and build as good a life as possible for us. And we did this in the Hamilton area, and actually the West Hamilton area. My children went to Binkley School, and it was wonderful having McMaster across the road, because I always had in mind that one day I would complete my education and go to McMaster.
So it was a good incentive.
Very good incentive, yes.
I know part of a little bit about your story, and as a single mother and being diagnosed with MS, you were at the point where you were actually crawling to try to feed the children, and you decided that you had to do something to control your life. What were the diagnoses given to you by doctors that you actually disregarded in the end?
Well, I certainly believed the diagnosis, which was multiple sclerosis, for the first time in many, many years. It made sense of the funny symptoms that I'd had since the summer I was 8 years old, but I didn't buy in.
What kind of symptoms would they have been?
The summer I was 8 years old, I started to stumble, and all of my friends laughed at me and told me I was clumsy, and I knew I wasn't. I knew that there was something the matter with my knee. And I just, before my knee would buckle, I would feel a little glitch in the edge of it. And so I began in my mind to yell, no, no, whenever I felt that little glitch. And eventually I felt that I had overcome it, but it did come and go. I also had bouts of numbness and tingling. I had funny things that happened to my eyes, but of course by the time we got to the doctor, the symptoms had all disappeared. And so these symptoms were explained away as my imagination and, attempts to get more attention. And so it wasn't until 1967, when I was immobilized from the neck down, that the symptoms were looked at seriously, and the diagnosis of multiple sclerosis was confirmed.
And what was the advice of the doctors for what you should be doing? Because you had been working, driving a car, looking after children. What was their suggestion that you, well, not just suggestion, I guess, but their orders for you to do?
Well, they told me that I would never recover. That was the first thing. And they said that I didn't have long, that I should get my affairs in order. And they also told me that because I would not recover, I would not work again and I couldn't drive again, and that someone would have to be hired to look after my children. They wanted me to go to hospital for 3 weeks of steroid therapy, but I was annoyed, and if no one else was going to look after my children, just me, I was going to raise them. And so I said, I thought I'd be okay, and I'm going to go home and look after my children. So they shook their heads and they told me that denial was the usual reaction to a diagnosis such as multiple sclerosis, and that when I learned to accept it, things would be better. And to this day, that particular sentence makes no sense. It didn't then and it doesn't now. I went home and I ignored the diagnosis. I focused all of my time and energy on my little girls. At that time, they were 1 and 2 years old. So I had a very active 2-year-old and a 1-year-old girl who was just starting to walk and just, discovering things like the couch and chairs and things. So we crawled around the apartment and we played games and we had little naps, and I started to get better. And indeed, before 3 months had passed, I was fully recovered, contrary to everybody's expectation. So I went back to work and had access, of course, to the medical library at the veterinary college. And so instead of playing bridge every lunch hour, I started going to the medical library. And the very, very first research paper I found was titled Remyelination in Multiple Sclerosis. And I was shocked. I thought, doctors have just told me that there was no chance of recovery, and yet this research indicated that there definitely was recovery in the nervous system. I followed all the references because I was curious as to how long this research had been in existence, and I tracked it back to the very first work that was published in 1961 by Dr. Mary Bartlett Bunge, who is currently head of the Miami Project to Cure Paralysis. She did a magnificent paper, and although this work has been corroborated repeatedly in the last 40 years, her work stands out for the simplicity and the beauty of its design and the meticulousness with which she did this work. And so right off the bat, I had proof from research that explained what I had just done, how I had just managed to recover, and assured me that I would always recover. And the most difficult thing after that was just to ignore all the people who were trying to tell me all the bad news, who were assuming that my course of MS would go as all the others or many of the other courses. So here I am.
Now, when did you decide to come to McMaster, and why?
I brought my girls to Hamilton, and about that time, McMaster Medical School opened, and I thought, oh goodness, here's a medical library right on Main Street, and I started going to the library to catch up on the research that had occurred in between the time of the divorce and my settling in Hamilton. And I was making new friends, of course, with my children going to school. I was meeting new people in the community, and they were encouraging me to write about my experience of recovery. And so I began to do that, and one of my friends worked in neurosciences at McMaster and offered to make me an appointment with anyone if I wanted to talk about the research that I was finding. And I was so fortunate that the appointment was made with Dr. Alan J. McComas, who was head of clinical neurosciences at that time, and subsequently became chairman of biomedical sciences as well. And he was quite taken with my story and my unwillingness to capitulate, and he became my mentor and my solid supporter, and still to this day. He encouraged me to continue my study of research and arranged for me to have a card to use the medical library legally. So,
well, when did you actually enroll into a course at the university? Yeah.
I began to find research in using the medical library here, began to find a lot of indications that MS runs a course, and that it can at some point permanently arrest itself. And so I decided that probably I was in that arrest state and that I could plan a future. I didn't have to live day by day. And so I decided that I must go back to school and complete my education. At that time, a subsection of the Department of Social Services was called vocational rehabilitation. And their mandate was to job train and or educate people with disabilities who had a chance of becoming independent. And through the Dean Dean of Women here at McMaster, Dean Scott, and one of the counselors at Voc Rehab, they agreed to fund me. Now, there was some fighting over it because they really didn't think someone with MS could possibly complete an education, a university education. However, by that time, I had met Dr. McComas and Dr. Johns in the physics department, and they wrote wonderful letters of support for me, and so Voc Rehab backed down and they funded me. So I began in 1975, and I began in biology, but after the first year, I knew that I needed to study physics. I knew that I wanted to comprehend from the energy level up, from the quantum level up to the macroscopic level. And so it only made sense to take physics. Dr. Johns warmly welcomed me into the physics department, and subsequently I graduated in 1979. Contrary to one specialist's prediction that I wouldn't pass a course, let alone get a degree, I graduated magna cum laude.
Wow. With two children.
With 2 children, yes.
That was wonderful. But then you continued on.
Yes. Well, also about that time, I went on a blind date, and I met this wonderful chap from Coketown. We were married shortly after I graduated, and because the economic burden, the financial burden had been lifted, I was open then to continuing, and I did a master's in electrical engineering.
And that was related to what you were doing in the first place in the physics as well?
Yes. Physics gave me a whole comprehension of how things work from the energy level up, the atomic level up. And electrical engineering helped me to better understand communication and electrical networking, which also then applies to what's going on in the nervous system of the human body. So I found both of those areas very, very beneficial, giving me a very different perspective on recovery from the damage of multiple sclerosis.
Then after that, then you were able to be employed in more than just doing research or whatever you were doing at the vet college. And so where did you go to work then?
Well, I decided that I wanted to see if I could live an ordinary life, be just an ordinary person and work 9 to 5. I was accepted, my employment application at Stelco was passed, and I began a job there in the computer department, which I enjoyed very much. It was wonderful driving into work every morning and having lunch with my fellows, and no one knowing my past history, my medical history or anything, that I was judged only on what I did from 9 to 5. But as life goes on, things changed, and there was a lot of reorganization at Stelco, and so after, I think it was about 7 or 8 years, and I left. Also in that time, I was being contacted by more and more people who had heard through the grapevine that I had recovered from the damage of multiple sclerosis, and they were interested in speaking with me. So I decided then that this is where I needed to apply my energy and my time, and I've done that ever since then.
You also been, and it wasn't just a little community type of effort, has it? It's been actually almost worldwide. If you could just sort of go through that just a little bit of as to how you got into affecting far more people positively.
I was always working on a manuscript for a book, and I had an agent for some time, and she suggested that I have my book professionally edited, which I agreed to. Of course, I wanted it to be a good book, and we couldn't find a publisher. And then I answered an ad in the Globe and Mail for a BBC producer who was looking for people who had kept interesting diaries. And while I had never kept a formal diary, I had kept notes and journals about all of my experiences in and out of hospital and through the divorce and so on. So I wrote this producer, and I was interviewed by the BBC, and it was aired in 1997, February of 1997. Now, the producer said to me that I should have something ready in black and white because he knew there would be a tremendous response to this interview and that I should have something on paper to send out. So I had my manuscript all ready to go and brought it to McMaster and had it printed. And the media department did the cover for me and worked with the print department, who are magnificent people. And so we produced the very first printing of Black Patent Shoes Dancing with MS. Shortly after, I was brave enough to develop a website, and I have it on a lot of, I don't know the technical terms for it because I haven't kept up on the computer world, but it's available to people around the world, and I do have contact from people in Europe and Africa and Australia, New Zealand, and all over North and South America, who either send their questions or they request to have me send them a book. So I am reaching people. I've even sent books to Kosovo and Croatia and Montenegro.
It's amazing, and how the word is spread really literally around the world. It's obviously a problem everywhere.
Yes, it is.
It's not just a Canadian. Although this area, is that correct? This area is quite highly affected?
It depends on the statistics. I took every statistics course I could while I was at McMaster just so that I could deal with this issue. And the very first lecture, the professor walked in and said, there are lies, white lies, and statistics. So the stats depend on who gathered them, how they were gathered, how they were processed. There are areas all over the world that claim to have the greatest incidence of MS. So we shouldn't focus on that. We should focus simply on what are we going to do about it.
And how you can get better.
We do already have research that has never been applied. And it is my hope, perhaps someone even listening to this interview will know how I can reach some funding to do a project on recovery. I do have a lot of backing in the neuroscience area and the kinesiology area, so I have a whole team of people ready to go. We just need the bucks.
Do you know your website? Or your email address? Or
my website is www.evamarsh.net, which is easy to remember because a lot of people have wanted to throw a net over me and get me out of the way. And my email is eva@evamarsh.net.
Great. Well, I hope that people will be able to use that if they're interested in either getting the book or is the book available in bookstores?
Independent bookstores will order it. A McMaster bookstore has it. Brian Prince bookstore here in Hamilton has it. The Different Drummer in Burlington. But again, any independent bookstore will look up the ISBN number and be able to send through an order.
Yes. Now, what are your plans for the future, or besides just continuing to do the wonderful work you are doing?
Thank you. Yes, I am continuing. I'm reaching more people. I'm doing more speaking engagements, more workshops for people to come and spend a day with me. And we delve into all of the research that hasn't or isn't being brought to public attention. Now, it's not a conspiracy of any kind. It's just this is the way research works, that what's brought to public attention suits the temperament of the moment. But I have a bad temper, so I went and found all my own information.
Is it true that you're writing another book?
Yes, and my second book is largely to answer a lot of the letters I have received from people from the first book or from my talks. And the letters deal with basic areas that I just couldn't deal with in the first book. So the second book will deal with things like what is an MRI really all about, and what's really happening in the nervous system when the myelin breaks down, and how does it repair. And as I mentioned before, there's been a tremendous amount of work already done showing that this occurs naturally. And I indicate how we can help to speed up this repair. And the whole secret is moving. And the more we move, the faster the myelin repairs itself and reconnects the way we want it. So that's what I'm committed to doing.
Do you need funding?
To do a proper research project, yes, that could be published in a creditable research journal, we do need to have funding.
When you say we, there's an organization of some kind?
No, it's just the backing, the people I have met in neuroscience and in kinesiology, who are ready to go. Like, we've already designed projects to look at people who have recovered and try and find out how they recovered, if there are some hints then that could be passed on to other people. And the other project would be to take people who have some degree of disability and work with them to recovery. But we need funding to do that.
Yes, of course, everybody needs funding.
Everybody needs funding, yes. And because I don't have an MD behind my name, people kind of look at me, and it's easy to brush me off, they think.
Yes, that it's not official enough.
It's not official enough, and yet, as I say, behind me I have a lot of solid support, and if I can find funding, they will then come forward. But this is
to verify what you're saying.
Yes.
Yes, and with
Yes.
their MDs and what other.
Yes, and all of their other degrees.
Yes.
So.
Well, it has been an absolute pleasure to meet you, and you are such an inspiration, and I hope that you will have inspired some people on the in the area, radio area, and through your books to believe, and if they have such symptoms, and not accept, unfortunately, what sometimes is given by doctors that include drugs, and not helping yourself. So I think you're doing such a wonderful job. McMaster is so lucky to have you. And come into the alumni gallery. We're very, very proud of you.
Thank you.
Good
Pearl,
luck.
may I just make one more
Yes.
comment about doctors? Doctors don't have the time to do the degree of literature review that I have done. I've had the luxury of years of hours where I could devote to sitting in the medical library and going through the stacks. And so this is why this information is available to me. Doctors do the best they can.
Yes.
And I can't fault any of them.
They can't research everything.
They can't research everything, and they do try to keep up, but there's a tendency to ignore the past research. And we have so much in the last 40 years that I'm trying to bring to public attention.
Well, all the best of luck. I hope that you do get funding, and maybe through this radio, someone may be able to come through that could be of help, and start the ball rolling for the money. All the best to you.
Thank you. It would certainly be wonderful for McMaster to have this
Yes.
happen here at McMaster.
Yes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pearl.